Hi there, this is David and welcome to my 10,000 subscribers special. After going through hundreds of games finding the absolute worst dungeons known to man, many people asked, "Hey David, why don't you just tell us what makes a good dungeon?" Well, that's what I'm here to do today. And to help me along, I'm going to look at my favorite game of all time, Dragon Quest V, and try to explain why I believe that it has the really great dungeons, and how the developers put a lot of thought, care, and purpose into their design while keeping spoilers of the game to an absolute minimum. The Rosa Cave. The very first dungeon that we come across is literally placed directly inside the first town. That makes it a perfect tutorial. You have easy access to inns, saving, shops, and items, and there's no downtime of wandering on the world map to get back into town to use the inn while you grind at the first few levels. Here it's quick and efficient and easy. Lenoire Castle. This could very well be the best dungeon in the game and you encounter it so early. It is a great haunting atmosphere and some puzzles, but nothing overwhelming. It's also the first real challenge of the game because you have to fight a large group of enemies. However, the game prepares you by providing the hero a boomerang, which hits all enemies, and Bianca a whip that hits every enemy in a group. You'll also encounter your first boss fight here, but thankfully there is a rest point beforehand, so again, you're prepared for the encounter. Dwarves Cave. Here we're introduced to pitfalls as well as the concept of keys to open doors, which we'll see later on in the game. Again, this is a simple dungeon, but it's still early in the game and the designers are slowly introducing mechanics here that you'll encounter more often later in the game. Ice Mansion. Here we have our first difficult boss fight, but thankfully, he's not in the darkest depths of the dungeon. The Ice Mansion's actually very short, the shortest dungeon in the game, with an ice movement puzzle that's almost optional. If you do it, you get some treasures. If not, hey, just fight the boss. The cave north of Reinhart. This is pretty cool and serves as the finale of the first act of the game. Paths on varying elevations and hidden passages are introduced here, as well as water puzzles to spruce things up a bit. Notice how each dungeon is just introducing one or two simple puzzle mechanics as to not overwhelm the player. Learning how to navigate those to best advantage will come in handy much later when the designers really do kick things up a notch. Rosa Cave Revisited. At the beginning of the second act, we have the only instance of backtracking in the entire game, but it's for a good purpose, and you get to sail upriver to an entirely new area of the dungeon. The hero gets a good opportunity to level up on metal slimes first introduced here, as well as find equipment and learn background information about himself, his mother, the legendary hero, and his upbringing. Reinhart Castle Basement. This dungeon has us doing something a bit different, a bit sneaky. We have to make our way into the castle through the dungeons using a boat to find the real queen, procure the Reinhart key, and use our first teleport door to head to the Southern Tower. Our first tower of the game. There are plenty of ledges and gaps to avoid here, but no real puzzles to deal with. It's just the game's way of introducing a new dungeon type and saying, hey, you're in a tower now, be careful or you'll fall off the edge. Except at the very end where you have to take a leap of faith based on what an NPC said earlier, but the game easily defines exactly where this is. Kabochi Cave. We've been through many caves now, so they are getting a bit more complex with added pitfalls, varying passages, and our first encounter with a trapped chest, and also something of a puzzle boss at the end. Notice though, how large the opening of the cave is. That's to let us know that we can bring our wagon inside. The Volcano. Something I love about this game is just the sheer variety of the dungeons that we have to go through, and here the game kicks it up a notch. Now we have some meandering dead ends to deal with, 2 elevations to traverse, as well as lava damage. For the most part, you can avoid the lava unless you want the treasures though. I really appreciate this. Each simple mechanic is introduced one at a time and then further expanded on as we progress further through the game. Waterfall Cave. I really like this cave. It's short, simple, and serene. It was designed for the specific purpose of falling in love again with Bianca with its beautiful atmosphere and the constant conversations that the two have. There aren't any real puzzles here, but there are still hidden treasure chests to find. It's a nice reprieve from the volcano. Path to Granvania. This is easily the longest dungeon thus far, but it doesn't get boring or tedious at all because of the way that they break it up. You begin having to climb the outside of the mountain, dealing with differing elevations, bridges, and walls. Then you enter a relatively short cave, only to find a mountaintop town on the other side. What an ingenious way to break up a long dungeon! After the events in town, you'll continue your way to Granvania by taking the cave on the other side. This cave is much more extensive than the first, consisting of pretty much a maze, followed by a rather fun jaunt down the mountainside using a tunneling system until you eventually make your way to the forests of Granvania. The Cave of Trials. Here we have a relatively short puzzle dungeon, reminiscent of the Cave of Betrayal from Dragon Quest IV. And I do have something to note here. Dragon Quest IV, 5, and 6 are all connected in a trilogy, and at this point you're going to see more nods to the previous game. I really do like this because it's subtle. It's just enough that you'll notice it if you're paying attention, but they don't beat you over the head with it. That being said, the puzzles consist of solving a simple door puzzle, then moving on to a water puzzle, finally culminating with a switch puzzle. All three are pretty simple, but it does have a boss fight at the end, which is nice, because we haven't been able to test our mettle in quite some time. Notice how there isn't a boss at the end of every single dungeon? They space them out to make them meaningful and impactful. Demon Tower. Easily the most involved tower thus far, spanning 10 floors and full of traps as well as treasure. But this is nice, considering that it is the final dungeon of Act 2. To break up the monotony of climbing the tower, there are mini-bosses strewn about, and cool puzzles on each floor such as pushing boulders to block fire-breathing dragons, invisible barriers blocking your way, teleporters, and switches. It never gets too overwhelming though, because each floor has its own unique puzzle mechanic to master. The Water Shrine. This is pretty neat and different. Here you're traversing an underwater tunnel on your ship in order to make it to the next town. It's relatively short, but it has meandering paths as if it was really cut out of the rock by erosion. It does remind me a lot of the Shrine of Breaking Waves in Dragon Quest IV, and I love how you start on the ocean side and emerge from the tunnel into the Valley of Elhaven. It's very well done. Zenithian Tower. This place is just amazing. You'll be exploring the same tower from Dragon Quest IV with the exact same layout, only this time it's in ruins. I love this concept. It's the same, but different. It's so smart and well done. There aren't any puzzles to be found, but there are people inside the tower. Treasure hunters and looters, even Zenithians. I only mention this because in just about every other RPG franchise, all the dungeons are just devoid of life. The people belong in the towns, the monsters belong in the dungeons. Not in Dragon Quest. It really brings the world to life to have people wandering all over the world, and sometimes you'll run into other adventurers while also exploring a dungeon. It's a joy to behold. Cave to Zenithia. In yet another throwback to Dragon Warrior 4, to enter this cave you have to dissolve some mountains with the magma staff, similar to how you entered Gardenburg. Also, at this point you might be thinking, ugh, yet another cave. But the designers in all their wisdom broke this place up and made it more than a cave. It's actually pretty fun, and I think that this is the first instance of a minecart puzzle in any RPG. As per usual, the puzzles start off simple enough, teaching you how the mechanic works, only to make it complex by the end. The Forest of Illusion. Here we have a typical Lost Woods type dungeon, where the paths lead to loops and dead ends, but thankfully, it's mercifully short. Also, when you get halfway through, your kids will just lead you to the exit. There's really not much pain here. The Tower of Boble. Another tower, but they turned it on its head quite literally, because you'll quickly ascend the tower on the outside, then begin your descent down the tower on the inside. It's a cute way to mix things up a bit. In order to progress, you need to find the eyes of the dragon statue, and doing so allows you to fulfill the real purpose of the tower, sweet, sweet revenge against the demons that have been terrorizing you since you were a little boy. The Great Temple. Speaking of sweet revenge, now it's time to raid the temple of our captors from so long ago. The game's wrapping up at this point, with this being the penultimate dungeon, and as such it's rather long and mazy, but it's nice that it's a new dungeon type to explore, and it's another elevation type maze dungeon, filled with people and a satisfying boss fight at the end. Evil Mountain. Finally, the final dungeon where all the traps that you've learned how to deal with over the course of the game come back to haunt you. It's really not that mazy though. Yeah, there are branching paths, but you mostly take them to find treasures, so it's nothing long and frustrating. You have trapped floors, moving floor tiles, and pitfalls. However, while some final dungeons can just drag on for forever and a day, this one doesn't wear out its welcome. You'll easily complete it in under an hour, It's just a great dungeon to wrap up a fantastic game. In closing, I'd like to say that good dungeons are more than just themselves. It's the sum of the parts of the entire game design. If you took just one of these dungeons and then just kind of repeated them throughout the game, that would be incredibly boring and horrible dungeon design. But with the amount of variety shown here, it never got boring and it never got stale or stagnant. No dungeon is significantly longer than the other, but no dungeon overstayed its welcome. There aren't any horrible gimmicks here, everything was very thoughtfully designed and planned. That's the key. This has been David. If you like this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a good day.